You are listening to Perplexity.
Beginning in about the 1980s, a wildfire would quickly spread throughout the United States, and by the late 90s to many parts of the world. These were modern-day witch trials. A distorted lens of hysteria had taken over, and the end result was more than 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritualistic abuse. Lives were destroyed by unspeakable rumors and wrongful convictions. Not even Dungeons and Dragons was safe. Churches were alleging backmasking was being used by rock musicians to put satanic messaging into their music. People were playing their records backwards to see if they were satanic. And to some extent, one could argue this movement still persists today. This is the story of the Satanic Panic. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Perplexity, a mystery podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kadra. If you're new to the show, hello and welcome. I tell tales every single week that have perplexed me. So if you love a mystery that leaves you wanting more, you're in the right place. And if you end up enjoying today's episode, I would love if you continue to follow along. If you're a returning listener, hello, my friends, and welcome back. So happy you're here. I have an insane story for you guys today, and I'm very excited to get into it. Today, I have Ed and Chris from the Scared All the Time podcast.
Hi,
What's
hello.
up? Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. I'm really happy y'all are here. And for people who are not familiar, Ed and Chris are awesome. Their podcast is great. They also have talked about this before. Do you guys want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, Chris, you want to handle any questions?
Yeah, so I'm usually the knowledge base on the show. Ed is the entertaining one, so I guess I'll take this question. We did an episode. We did a two-part episode on the Satanic Panic 2 Halloweens ago at this point, and it really came about because I have had a long-standing interest in the Satanic Panic. I discovered it on message boards in middle school in the 2000s.
You were on Wheatus message boards?
Well, yeah, Wheatus, the band, Ed is referencing the fact that Teenage Dirtbag kind of got inspired by the Satanic Panic, which is a fact that I didn't know until later in life. No, I was on much less appropriate message boards for a middle schooler, trying to. I loved falling down rabbit holes in the middle of the night. I would stay up really late on my family computer and just read all kinds of scary things. And that was where I discovered the Satanic Panic and these stories and rumors of kids who had been victims of satanic rituals or taken into their daycare's basement and forced to eat each other's poop and eat each other and all kinds of horrible things. And I was like, there's no way this is real. But a lot of people seem to think that it's real. And that kind of just inspired this. I was fascinated by that liminal space these rumors lived in, where they seemed impossible and there was never any evidence to back them up, but that didn't really seem to stop anyone from believing them to be true, and that really captivated me.
And I loved y'all's coverage on it. It was very interesting to hear y'all's opinions on it as well. And then I tried on purpose to add a little bit more and like kind of some different facts about Satanic Panic, a couple different cases, but there will definitely be some overlap.
Oh, that's fine. That's good.
Very quickly before we get started, just a couple quick announcements. First and foremost, I wanted to welcome my newest Perplexed Society members. Thank you so much to Isabel and Jacob for joining, and they both joined on YouTube, so I have some YouTube members now, which is really cool. Thank you guys for joining. And if you want to support the show, go check out patreon.com/Perplexity Mystery Podcast. Also, thank you to Heather for requesting this topic. I'm super excited to get into it. All the sources will be down in the show notes. I do want to say trigger warning for this episode, because while all of the things we're going to be talking about today are most likely completely false and did not happen, there are some very disturbing things that we will be talking about today, which I'm sure you guys already know, Chris and Ed, because you've talked about this. But anyway, this episode might not be for you, so listener discretion there. And last but certainly not least, kind of random, but one of my friends, Alicia, just released their new show. She's not new to podcasting, but Truly Twisted is one of her new shows, and it's great. I got to listen to it before it came out, and it's ethical, true crime, victim focused. The episodes are like 15 minutes. So go check out Truly Twisted wherever you get your podcasts. So without further ado, let's get into this episode about the Satanic Panic. Ed and Chris, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, so obviously, as you guys know, this is a huge topic. So what I'm going to be doing is like a big overview. We'll first talk about the origins and the catalysts of the movement, some key elements of the panic. Then we'll get into some of the most famous cases and investigations. And finally, we will talk about the lasting impact that the Satanic Panic has left on us. So first question for you guys, when you hear Satanic Panic, what does it make you think of?
I can answer this. Prior to us doing an episode on it, it just made me, I thought it was when people just kind of blow things out of proportion. Like a satanic panic could be, in my mind, it was the equivalent of saying you're making a mountain out of a molehill. And I just thought it was like an adage. I didn't know it actually had this whole history, which we're going to go through in your episode. But it's news to me. It was news to me.
When I hear Satanic Panic, I think, oh boy, I can't wait to hopefully learn some facts about it that I didn't already know. I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, I grew up in a pretty conservative religious household, which I've talked about a decent amount on this show before. So, and I grew up in the 90s, so I definitely remember hearing things like this. And you're like, don't listen to this secular music; it's satanic, and you can't watch Harry Potter because it has witchcraft in it. But I could watch Chronicles of Narnia.
One of those families, the no Harry Potter families. I remember those families. Harry Potter was
the families without whimsy.
Yeah. My sisters got into Harry Potter. I was a little bit too old for it when it really hit its peak. But my family was very Catholic, and so they were super conservative, but Harry Potter didn't seem to be a real issue for them. But I remember there were evangelical families that were very anti-Harry Potter.
Yeah, and it's weird because like I could watch Chronicles of Narnia, which also had a witch in it, and
a wardrobe.
A wardrobe, and time travel, portals, all of these things. But I guess because it had a Christian spin.
Yeah, it was Christian magic.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about some of the origins and catalysts for the Satanic Panic. We're going to start first in the 60s. So this was during the New Age spiritualist movement, one of my favorite movements. I love talking about this. But this decade was marked by a lot of controversial events. This was when psychedelics were getting really popular. There was the spread of non-traditional religions, and there was a lot of social unrest. There were young people in America that were starting to rebel against the current political status quo and the social climate. There were also a lot of protests going on because this was during the Vietnam War. There was racial segregation and just this big push for a contemporary society. So there was this counterculture movement, and all these people started forming communes, alternative lifestyles. So in 1967, a very well-known cultural phenomenon known as the Summer of Love would occur in San Francisco. More than 100,000 people gathered, and they were inspired by world peace, love, anti-materialism, things like that. Some people say this movement was about unity and hope, but other people saw this as a threat to their ways of life. This was near anarchy. The movement as a whole would also reject mainstream religion. And there were also things that were starting to become more popular, like occultism, witchcraft, horror movies like Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, and The Omen. So something that I believe you guys mentioned in your episode was also the publication of The Satan Seller in 1972. This was a best-selling book by Mike Warnke, and he
Mike. We mentioned Mike Warnke, and to this day we still get emails being like, you guys didn't know who Mike Warnke was? So we didn't mention his best-selling book because we had no idea who he was. He was a name in a weird ephemera document that Chris found.
Okay.
Well, yeah, there was a document that he had circulated around, and I should say I was ashamed that when people brought up that we should have known who Mike Warnke was, all the pieces fell into place, and I was like, oh, that's right, I remember this guy. But when we were looking at this document that he had circulated around schools as like a what to do if you think Satanism has infiltrated your high school, there was a piece in the back that was like, hey, and write a letter to Mike. Like, it kept referencing like, just tell these kids to contact Mike. And I was like, this Mike guy seems like he might be a problem.
Right.
Yeah, because the other things in the like reference area was like contact, the whatever police department and this whatever. And then it just said like Mike Warnke with his info. There was no like professional like status. So we were just like, who the fuck is Mike Warnke?
Right. It's like mine Warnke22 at flashmail.com or something like
God.
that.
That sounds like the email he would use. But at the time, there was no email. I think it was just write letters at. It was in Connecticut, too, which is where I'm from. So I was like, we really dropped a lot of balls on that episode.
So what's in his best-selling book? Is it just lists of kids that he contacted?
Yeah.
So
it's just my pen pals.
Yeah. If it makes you feel any better, first of all, like, I didn't know who this guy was either. So if you guys send me emails, great. But okay, so it's called The Satan Seller, and he claims that he led a group of 1,500 Satanists that engaged in human sacrifice and rape before he converted to being an evangelical Christian.
Yeah, cool. Now he's telling kids to shoot him a letter.
Another secret piece of Mike history that he ran a satanic group.
Yeah, we didn't know that. This is news.
Okay. Well, and it's also very interesting because, of course, this book came out during the Satanic Panic. It naturally is going to get praised by the Christian Century magazine and Moody Monthly. And, of course, 2 decades later, by the time it had already done a bunch of damage, the book was completely debunked by another evangelical magazine called Cornerstone. The entire thing was made up, but at the time of the Satanic Panic, a lot of people bought into it, and the book sold like crazy.
I do have one question. Is it Satan Cellar like a basement, or Satan Cellar like he's selling you something?
It's spelled SELL.
Okay, so he's selling Satan.
I guess so.
Yeah, okay, got you.
But his whole argument was basically like, I did all these horrible things, but God saved me, so he can save you, and reject against these occult beliefs.
It always is.
Did you know he's a stand-up comedian now?
No.
I think he started as a stand-up comedian.
Oh, well, he's a Christian comedian. Somebody was telling me this.
He has a record. He had like a comedy album.
Yeah, and VHS. I looked him up. There were like VHS tapes, and one was like "Out of My Mind." Mike Warnke. He's
From rape to righteousness, the Mike Warnke story.
Oh my God. Okay, so then if people have looked into the Satanic Panic, most of you have heard of this next book. So this is Michelle Remembers, and this was published in 1980. So some people argue that the Satanic Panic actually started in the United States when this book came out, but there's a lot of different opinions on that. We're not going to get into that. But this book was published in 1980, and it was written by a Victoria psychiatrist. So this actually started in Canada with Dr. Larry Pazder. And he wrote this with the help of his patient, who later became his wife, which is very problematic. And this was Michelle Smith. Michelle was a local housewife that was seeking treatment. She had been dealing with depression. She had recently had a miscarriage, and she kept getting this weird feeling that she needed to tell Pazder something, but she didn't remember what it was. So instead of, doing like something logical with this, Pazder decided that he was going to do this very experimental, unethical, recovered memory therapy with Michelle. And so there's I think 600 hours, something like that.
Oh my God.
of recordings. But one of the sources that I read was that the vast majority of this is Michelle screaming.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think my theory on this was there's clearly some very big problems with a psychiatrist marrying their patient, but I feel like Michelle coming to Dr. Pazder and being like, I have to tell you something, but I just can't remember what it is. Like, I think she was trying to confess that she had a crush on him, and he was completely did not see it and was like, all right, well, let's see. Let's scramble your brains and see what comes out. Like, I'll figure this out. I'll unlock your secrets. And
Oh my God.
It was a love affair gone bad.
What's the term you coined, Chris, for memory regression or whatever? You probably forgot it.
I don't remember. I
Sorry.
remember talking about this in the episode, but I do not remember we did have a funny term for it.
We had a
so-
term. We
I don't.
apologize.
I
We'll
don't
look it up and
remember
send it to you.
either. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
no, it's not memorable. Apparently, no wonder we never used it again.
Most of what I say isn't. So
I was just gonna say to what Chris said. That's like one of the most heightened extreme examples of a man not being able to like pick up on hints that a girl likes him.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would believe that for sure. So they used this now discredited practice of recovered memory therapy, and the book became a bestseller. The tagline on the book is "The shocking true story of the ultimate evil, a child possession by the devil."
Wow, that's the sub like it's Michelle remembers all that, or is that just how they describe it?
It's like on the cover. It's like a
Sure.
little tagline right under the title.
It should be called Everything We Got Between the Screams.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm scared to listen to Chris, do you know if the tapes are online anywhere? I'm kind of scared to listen to them.
Clips of them are. I couldn't find an archive of all of them, and even the clips. It reminded me of when I was I was trying to find for one of our episodes. I was trying to find clips of the audio from when the guy from Grizzly Man got eaten by a bear on camera or on tape, and there's sounds of that, and it's tough to find because no one's ever posted the whole thing, and so everything that you find, you're not entirely sure if it is real. Like, it sounds kind of real, but then you're like, well, where did this come from, and who put this out here, and why is it sitting on the internet? And anyway, Michelle Remembers tapes are kind of similar. Like, there's clips, but I don't know how real a lot of them are versus just somebody being like, doing a little audio production.
That's fair. Okay. So, for people who aren't familiar with this book, in the book, Michelle claims that she would, using gigantic air quotes, remember that at age 5, her mother had given her away to a satanic ritualistic cult where she was held captive and tortured for over a year. She witnessed murders and mutilations, including that of babies, between 1954 and 1955. As the torture reaches a climax in the book, a portal to hell opens and Satan himself appears, only to be vanquished by the Virgin Mary and the Archangel Michael.
You'd think that would be the point near the end of the book where Archangel Michael appears, where people, including Oprah, might tap out and go, this seems heightened at best.
Yeah.
But no, they went right along with it.
You said this is 1950s? 1950.
She says that's when it happened.
Oh, back when she was a child.
Yeah, Michelle
Got
was
you.
a kid. Yeah.
Got you. Okay,
yeah.
got you.
The book was published in 1980.
Sure.
Yeah, so she appeared on shows like Oprah and CBC's Midday, and Pazder and Michelle Smith were quickly labeled these basically experts in satanic ritualistic abuse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they'll come up a lot
write
more.
whatever you want on your business card.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
different
yeah.
time.
At this point now, the two mainstream experts on satanic ritual abuse are Michelle and Larry and Mike Warnke, none of whom are experts in seemingly anything, never mind the Satanic Panic or anything real.
Right, exactly. So other psychiatrists throughout the US and even members of law enforcement started turning to them for help. And we now know this book has been widely discredited, as if that wasn't already obvious, with its reliance on controversial therapeutic techniques, implausible accounts, and a complete lack of evidence. The general consensus now is that these memories were fabricated or influenced by suggestion during these therapy sessions. What was so significant about this book is that it was the first modern claim that child abuse was linked to satanic rituals.
Oh,
Yes.
first modern
Yeah.
accounts. You're saying that we can go back further, and it was a regular,
Well,
it was an
yeah.
regular occurrence. Yeah,
Yeah, like witchcraft and all that kind of stuff going
Mhm.
back through the ages. A lot of like anti-Semitic kind of rumors in the Middle
Sure.
Ages and stuff. Always like blood libel and all that. Always was revolving around kids being eaten or drained
Yeah,
of
I've been
blood.
afflicted. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah,
Okay, so the first review of this book could have started with, "I thought this was behind us."
Yeah. Another prominent event was in 1969 when the Satanic Bible was published. The rise of organized Satanism in the late 60s is mostly attributed to Anton Szandor LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan in San Francisco in 1966. This was the first publicly recognized satanic organization that quickly gained the attention of the media. And the media is majorly why the Church of Satan became so popular.
Mm.
Satanic baptisms and marriages were publicly recorded and shown to the media, garnering worldwide publicity and fear-mongering. The amount of coverage also resulted in the church growing because many people found the movement attractive. It was liberating, it was part of that counterculture movement, freedom against religion, things like that. However, Satanists didn't seek higher spiritual power or a deity to worship. The movement was highly controversial at the time and adopted the devil as more of a symbol of rebellion against established authority. And some people argue this mirrors ideas of other earlier occultists like Aleister Crowley.
Sure.
Yeah, it's all very heightened and kind of silly in hindsight, and clearly just a way for LaVey to get laid. I mean, that's mostly what this all came back to, was sexual magic was like a big part of the rituals that they practiced. And I do think it was, there was certainly it tapped into that wider cultural feeling. When was the Time cover that said God is dead famously? Was
Like
that
the 70s?
70s?
I think
Yeah.
so.
There was a wave of kind of throwing off the shackles of a conservative past and moving into this more new agey future. But so much of the actual Church of Satan stuff was so much sillier than, and not to say I do think some of it was probably pretty dark. I mean, there were people who probably participated in things that they maybe weren't super fond of in the moment, or look back and go, I don't know about that. That seemed kind of like a bad idea. But it wasn't nearly at the level of sacrificing babies and stuff. It was much campier, I think, and I think knowingly campy. I think that was sort of it just happened to scare people. So it was like listening to Rob Zombie or Marilyn Manson in high school, like, or middle school. It was cool for a minute because it seemed like it pissed people off, and
Sure.
then it just gets. There's a hilarious Onion article that's like this from like 20 years ago now that was like desperate Marilyn Manson going door to door trying to shock people. And it was just like, at a certain point, it's not scary and cool anymore. It's just sort of dumb.
Yeah. I think it's also important to distinguish that, like, when the Church of Satan came around, like Chris was saying, it was like for very different reasons. It's no way about the Christian devil or about violence, which is how it was being depicted in the media. And this really goes back to like an us versus them mentality. Like there can only we were largely considered a Christian conservative nation during this time. So these were seen as like the good moral people. So anything different that we don't understand is now being labeled as dangerous or bad.
Dumb.
Yeah. Okay, so some key elements of the panic. Backward messaging in rock music.
Mm-hmm.
In December 1985, 18-year-old Raymond Belknap and 20-year-old James Vance ended a night of drinking by committing to a suicide pact. Belknap had completed suicide, and Vance would attempt to do the same, but he survived. Both men were fans of the rock band Judas Priest. This was one band among many that had been attacked for allegedly having recorded subliminal messaging in their music. Vance's parents would sue Judas Priest for millions of dollars in damages, alleging that phrases like "do it" and "let's be dead" were delivered with their music to Vance's subconscious.
Oh my God.
"Let's be dead" is such a again hilarious way of trying to get someone to kill themselves.
Right.
It's very fun. It's actually fun to say. It's fun.
Yeah.
And also, if you're suing Judas, you should be suing Nike at this point as well.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah.
Wasn't there something like that was like going around on the internet that was like, what do they want us to do? It was some conspiracy with Nike.
I'm sure.
Their latest, I see it when I drive down the road now. There's LA is nothing if not billboards for shit. That's all it is. And mainly for the movies, so that people in LA think that people watch movies. And like, I swear to God, what you're doing matters. And so I've been noticing there's new Nike ads everywhere, and their new thing is, you can't win, so win. The fuck does that even mean?
Yeah, what do I do with that?
And I guess I could, I guess. I don't know. It's also suicide, I guess. I don't know.
It's very much a modern downer kind of advertising phrase. Like, it makes you feel something, I guess, but I don't know that it makes you feel great.
Yeah. I think, I stopped and thought about it. I'm talking about it right now. So.
I didn't know that this was the new slogan of theirs, Ed, until you just told me this.
You had a baby. You haven't left your house, and you haven't driven by anything.
It is shockingly relevant to the
to the world right now. Yes.
You could illustrate the cultural difference between the 90s and now with just those two Nike slogans.
Yeah, just do it, which is the world's in front of you. Everything, world is your oyster. Do what you know what I mean? And now it's like, you can't win. And then on the bottom of the billboard, so win. Which is like, do it in spite of all the hurdles.
Fact, that the world is falling apart.
Exactly.
Exactly. It's like, just keep going, I guess.
Yeah. That was probably the first pass. And then they were like, it won't fit on the billboard. Just keep going, I guess. All right. I'm sorry to continue.
No, you're fine. I do feel for the parents in this. Obviously, it's horrible to lose your child to suicide. So they're grieving, they're trying to find any possible reason. But the idea of this trial is like so ridiculous to me. So they had audio engineers during this trial while they're suing Judas Priest, playing Judas Priest music at various speeds, forwards and backwards. And they were like having the jury try to listen for these phrases, "let's be dead," things like that.
Yeah. That's about as convincing as playing an EVP in court and being like, look, the ghost, if you listen to the static, the ghost says, "let's be dead." You know, like, you're just interpreting what you want to hear at that point.
Right. Well, luckily, and I feel like this is probably like the only story that goes like this in this entire episode, but luckily it was found there were no messages in the music. So that trial didn't go anywhere. There were also a lot of alleged occult themes in various cartoons. People were claiming that Saturday morning cartoons were teaching children things like spells and witchcraft.
Sure.
Another one that comes up a lot is Dungeons and Dragons. So in 1974, this role-playing fantasy game captured imaginations of gamers everywhere. But they were soon embroiled in a lot of controversy over the game's sorcery and occult elements. In 1979, the hysteria reached new heights after James Egbert, a 16-year-old computer science student, was believed to have gotten lost in the underground tunnels near Michigan State University.
What are you doing in the tunnels?
Aside, is there a better name for a computer science student than James Egbert?
Right?
old egghead Egbert.
Old Egbert.
I feel like that guy had, I continue your story, but I feel like he was maybe being bullied. Poor old Egbert.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna the bullies won't find me in these tunnels. The thing that raised my eyebrow there is like, you're 16 years old and you have like a fucking major or whatever. At 16, I was majoring in fucking making trapper keepers or whatever.
He was like a child prodigy, and that's why he was in college so early. And I think that, so basically when he went missing, the media blew this up and was like, he played Dungeons and Dragons and the game spiraled him into madness, and that's why he's missing and blah, blah, blah.
Nobody was like, the game made him smart. Now he's going to graduate at 17 from college.
Yeah, exactly. What had basically happened is that he had apparently run away and knew about these tunnels under the university. He went under there. He was going through like some mental health issues. He was struggling with being a child prodigy, and it's also alleged that he was struggling with his sexuality.
Okay, that's a trifecta for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he did, unfortunately, complete suicide as well. So, with all of this negative publicity came about a group that you guys briefly mentioned in one of your episodes, BAD, a group founded by a mother, and this stands for Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh my God, these moms, they got to get better. The acronyms are great. MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and
Yeah.
they seem like they follow a pattern. Their acronyms, but they're never great in terms of when you break them out. Be like, really?
Right.
Seems like you're missing an N or an A in there.
You know, and I do have to say, I don't know how much longer we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, but I had this thought, so I should spit this out before.
No, I think
before
we're about done with Dungeons and Dragons, so go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will say, you guys know about Bobby Fischer, right?
The chess master.
Yeah, who became like a giant lunatic, anti-Semite conspiracy theorist. You know, lizard people are taking over the world, and no one blames chess for making Bobby Fischer crazy.
Interesting.
You know, I think my point being, I think there are people drawn to certain kinds of activities. I think chess players have the ability to become conspiracy theorists because their brains are trained to look for patterns. You're like, oh, that's all you're doing is looking for patterns and pattern recognition. And I think somebody like poor old Egbert, you know, you're drawn towards this fantasy world that you can escape into because your life is kind of bad. And sure, people who are drawn to that kind of thing may end up completing suicide.
Yeah.
So, you know, that it's not surprising that you find those kinds of people, but I think culturally it's looked at backwards. Culturally, it's looked at everyone's fine, and the thing that they do must be the thing that causes the problem.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good way to look at it. Something that also came up in my research, which is, again, just kind of controversial, different opinions, but women were also going to work during this time. So they weren't staying home with their kids anymore. And there was this big fear in taking your kids to be under the care of somebody that you didn't know.
Mm.
And if you combine this with the 70s, with the stranger danger movement, there's a lot of people that started to get scared. There's this fear mongering about, you know, who do you trust?
You don't trust anybody. You leave the baby in a cemetery like Michelle's mom did, and then you go to work.
Yeah, duh. So this would end up leading to a lot of claims that daycare centers were harming these children, which we'll get into in just a little bit. This also would come about during the development of the social work field when society was struggling with recognizing a major problem, child sexual abuse. So it's not that this was happening more or less, it was happening just as much. It's just we weren't talking about it until this time period. And also social work was a very new field. So social workers had no idea. They weren't equipped on how to do or handle any of this.
Mm-hmm.
In the early 80s, there was a new implementation of mandatory reporting laws as well. So this resulted in a large, seemingly increase in child sex abuse cases. There was this child protection investigation happening all over America. So this really just heightened our awareness of it. So now let's get into some of the most notable cases and investigations that were part of the Satanic Panic. One of the key historical events that created widespread fear of the occult was the murder of Shannon Tate by members of the Manson family in 1969. Most of Charles Manson's followers lived unconventional lifestyles, which included living in communes and using psychedelic drugs. There is no evidence of the direct connection to Charles Manson's family and the Church of Satan, but rumors would spread. And the media quickly took a hold of them and started to make these claims like Charles Manson's real motivations were connected to Satanism.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a lot more connections between Charles Manson and the CIA.
CIA.
Than there are
Yeah.
between Charles Manson and Satanism.
Oh my
Although,
God.
then you got to wonder how many connections there are between the CIA and Satanism, which I think some people would argue, again, there's a lot more spooky doings there than in some of these other
I
places.
mean, look at Crowley and those guys. Weren't they all like JPL people in like Pasadena? And
JPL. Well, yeah. Was Crowley a JPL guy? There was a cluster of I live in Pasadena, and there's
Yeah.
a site called the Portal to Hell in Pasadena that is supposedly where who's the guy that was building the rockets who was part of that whole esoteric.
that's who I'm thinking of. We have a new one of those, but this is the original. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can't. Speaking of things that seem to attract crazy people, rockets.
Oh
seem to
man.
really have a
And Nazis, because the fucking the Project Paperclip or whatever. That's how we got all these engineers.
Oh my God.
the guy who founded, I think one of the guys who founded JPL, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, we won't bog you down. This is in our show. We have a thing called Trivia Bot that'll take care of this. But
Ooh, yeah.
Jack.
I like
Parsons.
trivia.
Jack
Bots.
Parson, yeah.
Okay. So Charles Manson, they're trying to make all these ties to Satanism, and they started labeling the family as these devil worshippers. The media played a major part in feeding the public's fears with misconceptions surrounding occult practices. And this is also just when cults were in their heyday. Then there is the very famous McMartin preschool case, which you guys talked about.
Mhm.
And if you guys remember Larry Pazder from Michelle Remembers, he consulted on the McMartin preschool trial.
Unbelievable.
One of the earliest and largest child sexual abuse cases in the United States was the McMartin preschool trial, which involved allegations against the owners and teachers of a preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. Although none of the accused were convicted, the case garnered significant media attention. This all began in 1983 when Judy Johnson, a mother of one of the preschool students, told police that her son had been sodomized by her estranged husband and by a teacher at the school, Ray Bucky. She said her son had a painful bowel movement, and that is when her belief that her son had been abused began.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm having the same reaction that I had in our show, but I'm hearing it for the first time again, I guess.
Some sources would claim her son denied this suggestion, while others say that he would confirm the abuse. Johnson would also claim workers at the daycare were having sex with animals and abusing and torturing the children. Police then did a crazy thing where they sent a letter to hundreds of parents of students at the school saying, hey, your kid may have been abused.
Oh my God.
And they made a list, if I'm remembering correctly, of all of these questions that they wanted the parents to ask their children.
That's so fucking crazy. That would never have left my office. The first time someone suggested it to me and you're like, hey boss, I'm thinking about this, I'd be like, you're fucking fired.
Yeah.
Like, there's the worst idea of I know there's a sign on my door that says no bad ideas, but this is a fireable idea.
Right, because no notes are being taken, nothing is being recorded. This is a game of telephone, and you have untrained parents interviewing their children. Everything is wrong with this.
Yeah, and I know people. A lot of the backbone of this case and of a lot of other satanic panic cases is the idea that children don't lie.
Yes,
but all children do is lie.
It's all they fucking do.
They might not think of it as lying, but they're easily manipulated and easily misled, and they have big imaginations, and they just say stuff. It's the same when people are like, oh, I think my kid is a reincarnated World War II pilot or something because he's talking about airplanes a lot. It's like, I mean, he's not making it up in the sense that he's trying to make you think he's a reincarnated World War II pilot. You're doing that part. He's just saying things about airplanes that he heard on TV.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing here, I think.
Yeah, the power of suggestion, for sure. And Johnson, the mother of this child who was allegedly abused, was also later diagnosed with acute paranoid schizophrenia. And in 1986,
Thanks,
she was
Dungeons and Dragons.
right. In 1986, she was found dead in her home with complications from chronic alcoholism. The children at the school were interviewed using highly suggestive techniques by untrained people, and in the spring of 1984, 360 kids had apparently been abused based on no evidence. There were claims.
Please check one of these two boxes. They both just say yes on the thing they sent. I guess I chose the yes on the left.
The top or the bottom one? The one in Times New Roman or the one in Comic Sans? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. There was nothing funny about our abuse, so I chose Times New Roman.
There were claims that children were being led into tunnels underneath the school.
Tunnels make an appearance again.
There's so many. Why are there always tunnels?
There's tunnels
They're
under.
spooky. A tunnel is a spooky place to go.
Every urban legend has a tunnel, I swear.
I think because tunnels are a way to do things without being seen. It's a way to transport to one location to another without anyone knowing. So
that's fair.
It's a clandestine hallway.
Yeah, and I mean, this is like another point, kind of like in Michelle Remembers what Chris was saying, where it's like, how did anybody believe any of this? Like, the claims that were made in this are just completely insane. They were saying, I don't know.
People are fucking dumb. Dude. This is what we've keep seeing over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's like when we do our show and we're going through historical things, it's like, yeah, I don't know. Everyone's just an idiot, I guess.
People are just gullible.
Yeah.
They were making claims like children were being flushed down toilets into secret rooms and being abused.
No fucking way. My dad's a plumber. There's no way. Do you know how many, his whole livelihood is that things get clogged. Like, you can't just flush anything down a toilet.
Ed, your dad's never found a baby clogging a pipe?
I'm not saying he didn't. I'm just saying he's never found a baby that successfully went through a pipe.
Fair.
Y'all also mentioned in your episode that the kids were saying things like they saw a giraffe get beaten to death.
Yes. If I remember, because this is the one that stuck with me from, it was one of the first things I remember reading on those message boards was this story of, and I think it was McMartin, but maybe it was a different one, that the kids had been placed into a hot air balloon and flown somewhere to beat a giraffe with baseball bats.
Yes.
To death. Beat it to death. Which ain't no kid reaching up and hitting that giraffe across the face with the baseball bat.
No.
No.
No, you gotta
imagine them all attacking the giraffe like a pack of velociraptors. Like they all have to jump on its back to bring it down low enough.
It's a team building exercise. Like the only way we succeed is together.
Yeah.
I feel like we could have used a few more kids. Yeah, but we needed to take up room in the hot air balloon basket with these step ladders.
Yes.
I also think if you're satanically abusing all these kids, the last thing you want to do is train and arm them with baseball bats.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I could turn against you real quick.
Yeah.
They could take down a game animal. They could take down you.
There were 2 trials conducted in 1987 and 1990.
Both found the draft to be at fault.
Yeah. In 1984, there were also 100 counts of child abuse charges, and this later expanded to 321 counts involving 48 children.
Jesus.
During the hearing, Michelle Smith from Michelle Remembers and Lawrence Pasder made their appearance. They met with parents and children involved in the case, and a lot of people believe, including myself, that they influenced the children's testimony. The case lasted 7 years and cost $15 million.
In what year was the set? 1980, right?
1987 and 1990. There were 2 trials.
Sure. 15 million. That's like 16 billion today.
This was the longest and most expensive criminal case in the history of the United States legal system, and there were no convictions.
That sounds like California.
The preschool was also closed and demolished, and one child would later retract his confession, saying, quote, "Never did anyone do anything to me, and I never saw them doing anything. I said a lot of things that didn't happen. I lied. Anytime I would give them an answer that they didn't like, they would ask again and encourage me to give them the answer that they were looking for. I felt uncomfortable and a little ashamed that I was being dishonest. But at the same time, being the type of person I was, I would do whatever my parents wanted me to do."
That's so
quote.
sad. That's so sad. I'm sure that was so many of the stories.
I would have 1,000% made stuff up, if I felt like that's what I was supposed to do.
Right.
Like if I felt like I was so, as a kid, I was so, and I think, if some of these kids were raised in religious households, which you imagine some of them must have been if they were so quick to jump on the Satanism, it's a very, obedience is a big deal.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you're supposed to do a certain thing or act a certain way, even if you're not sure why, you just sort of do it.
Exactly.
And I think, it's something that I've found so fascinating too, is that a lot of these kids, well, I shouldn't say a lot because I don't know how many people have come out publicly and said this, but I have read some accounts of people who still struggle with nightmares and these sort of memories floating around in their heads that they know aren't real, but they were so young and scared that they kind of got in their heads as this sort of maybe kind of half real remembered thing, and those are still kicking around in there 30, 40 years later. And that's a really sinister kind of situation to find yourself trapped in, with horrible memories of things that are fake.
Yeah, it's very scary and sad. I sent a message in one of the podcast groups I'm in when I was going to do this of like, hey, what do you guys think of when you think of Satanic Panic? And there was a girl in there who said that she had friends growing up during that time. A couple were committed into mental institutions because they were allegedly involved in a satanic cult when they were doing no such thing. Like, I mean, this really ruined so many people's lives. And there's all these people today that are still like, did that happen? And like struggling with these false memories.
Oh, I
Yeah,
hate
I
it.
have
What a gross, horrible thing to have done to someone and then be gone the next day. Be like, oh, well, whatever. I sent a letter once. Oh, I talked at their school and never think about the 40 years of nonsense that you
Mhm.
fucking planted a seed for.
Yeah.
I have a friend who got involved in making a podcast about the Satanic Panic because I'm going to forget the name of the show now, but he also had an interest in the Satanic Panic, and near the town where he grew up in New Jersey, there was a case of Satanic Panic, and the woman at the center of it, who had been the one that the cops had kind of pulled these stories out of to begin with, that sent someone to prison. Years later, I believe she sued the police department. I can't exactly be sure, but basically she ended up with the recordings of their interviews of her. And they built a podcast around these interviews because it's so obvious when you listen to it, the way that the cops are drawing these
Mm.
stories out of her, that they're very kind of slowly but surely, the details change until they lock in each piece. And really, I mean, this is probably too broad of a statement to make, but it's kind of the same way that cops elicit false confessions from people in all kinds of cases, where it's
Mhm.
like, hey man, we know you killed your wife, man. So, you're not going anywhere until we get to the bottom of this. And especially people who don't know that they can ask for a lawyer or feel like it might make them look guilty, they get stuck in these rooms for 10, 12 hours with no food. It's a good time to say on the show, not that listeners of Perplexity and Mystery Podcast would find themselves under arrest and in an interrogation room, but if you ever do, there is no shame in asking for a lawyer.
Yeah.
Ask for a lawyer. No matter
100.
how innocent you are, ask for a lawyer.
100%.
It never works out if you don't ask for a lawyer.
Yeah. No, 100%. Ask for a lawyer. You don't need to talk. In 1990, parents who believed their children had been abused at the preschool actually hired an archaeologist named E. Gary Stickle.
Yeah, that's a funny name. Sorry, Dick Stickley. They hired Dick Stickley.
Stickle. He investigated the site and he claimed that he found evidence of tunnels, but then they sent multiple people later to also investigate and they found no evidence of tunnels. There was like concrete there and they tried to say that, well, they covered it up before we could find it and stuff like that.
God.
So, they just wouldn't let it go.
I've read some of those reports before, and it sounds like they did find stuff, but it also sounds like what they found very easily could have just been previous construction, or that trash had been thrown in that area, because it was just they found things that they were like, well, why was this plastic bag so far underground? It must have been in the tunnel, kind
Okay.
of stuff. And it's like, that's not really, you're taking a leap. What might be convincing of a tunnel would be finding, I don't know,
Beams, structural supports.
Yeah, wooden supports, that's things in a tunnel, but they didn't find any of that. They just found like trash.
And
They
you know
didn't-
when they like prodded at it, they were like Stickle or whatever. Not even an archaeologist. He just printed up a business card and said tunnel expert. That's like the way all this shit worked back then.
When your satanic experts are people who are self-proclaimed, I think Ed's exactly right that this guy was a self-proclaimed tunnel expert.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Thank you for clarifying, but that is what I was saying.
So they didn't find a hot air balloon or a
Or a dead
pentagram.
giraffe.
Yeah, no dead giraffe. Okay. Okay, so some other noteworthy daycare trials. The Fells Acres daycare case in Massachusetts. This involved the Amaralt family, Gerald, Violet, and Cheryl. They were accused of abusing and molesting children at their daycare. The case involved, again, fantastical claims, such as the children being abused by a clown or a robot.
Oh,
Oof.
All,
Clown scary, robot kind of funny.
yeah.
no. The robot, I don't like any robot. It's ineffectual and it doesn't understand its own strength. So that's why I don't want the robot involved.
All three Amaralts were initially convicted, but Violet and Cheryl were released after 8 years in prison.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
8 fucking years. Ocho in prison for something that
Yeah.
they were released because they did their time, or they were released because it was overturned.
I didn't look super deep into all these cases for the sake of like overview, but yeah,
And neither did these court cases. Don't worry.
Yeah, true. Yeah, exactly. There was also, this one's a little more well known, the Martinsville, Saskatchewan case. This was in Canada, and it involved allegations of satanic ritual abuse at their daycare. This led to multiple arrests and convictions. However, most of the convictions, not all, were later overturned.
Oh my God.
There was also the Kern County child abuse cases in Kern County, California. This was in the 80s. It was alleged that 60 children had been abused and involved in a satanic ritual abuse in a sex ring. At least 36 people were convicted, and most of them spent years in prison. 34 convictions were later overturned. Two of those convicted were not able to prove their innocence, and they died in prison.
Brutal. I should say none of these cases had any physical evidence, right?
Yeah, none.
I don't believe so.
No.
Wow.
Yeah. The Oak Hill accusations in 1991 in Austin, Texas, where I live. This was with the Kellers, Fran Keller and her husband Dan. They ran a small daycare and were accused of repeatedly and sadistically abusing several of the children. Among some of the accusations were crazy things, like they had forced children to drink blood-laced Kool-Aid.
Oh,
They had
it's an iron, a lot of iron in that.
Yeah, a lot of iron. They said that they had forced the children to watch them kill and dismember animals and a baby. They claimed that they had made them have sex on video, just unspeakable, horrific things that, again, had absolutely no evidence. The children also recalled several trips that they took with the Kellers on planes, including a trip to Mexico, where they were sexually abused by soldiers just before they got back to Austin in time for their parents to pick them up from their daycare.
So it was
Yeah.
a single day.
Yeah.
It was a single
Yeah,
day.
It was
it's
it was
a
more of
border.
a field trip,
Hmm.
and the fact that those kinds of scars and marks and things were never found is part of the big side eye towards these cases. Is, well, okay, so now we're going to step. Not only were they abused, not only were they satanically abused, but there was actual, I guess, magic involved in healing these kids before pickup time.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Also, where are all these babies coming from that everyone's
Yeah.
killing and eating?
Oh, they leave them at fire stations.
Oh.
Yeah, that's where they go.
Are you accusing the firefighters, Ed, of being Satanists now?
No, I'm accusing them of not checking the baby box at a regular.
The baby
Intervals.
box.
So you're saying Satanists know the kids get left at the fire stations, and they're like waiting, hiding in the bushes.
Yeah, there's like a
Snatch
6-hour
them.
window
Yeah.
where it's just
Damn.
definitely going to be a baby cooing alone in a box.
Don't do that, Satanists. We shouldn't be giving these people ideas.
Stranger danger. With information gathered from Believe the Children, an organization created by the parents involved in the McMartin preschool trial, the children were repeatedly questioned by parents, therapists, and law enforcement
Wait, I'm sorry.
officers.
It's called Believe the Children, and it's from the parents of the McMartin. They did believe the children who were just lying, and then we ended up people in prison.
So, what ultimately happened is the Kellers were convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 48 years in prison from a trial that consisted of no physical evidence, one confession that was later retracted, flawed medical exams of the children, testimony by a dubious expert on satanic ritual abuse, and with the prosecution withholding vital information from the defense. The Kellers were not freed until 2013, after they were declared innocent and given compensation. And pretty recently, on June 20th, 2017, a Travis County District Attorney announced that the case had finally been dismissed and the Kellers were deemed innocent.
Wow. That
Hey,
is
there's
so
a-
recent.
Yeah.
The ending. Yeah.
That is crazy. But they got some dough, it sounds like, which doesn't make it better, but
Right.
doesn't hurt.
Yeah, they got out like in their 60s, and they were just like this sweet couple that ran this tiny daycare down here. Like, it's awful.
Yeah.
What happened to that? Did you go visit the location? Is it like close to you to see what it became? Is it a Chipotle now?
I have no idea, actually. So the final daycare that I'm going to talk about is in Washington State. This is the Wenatchee investigation. In Washington State, multiple adults were accused of participating in a large pedophile ring. Many of those accused were poor and had intellectual disabilities. The story began in January 1995 when Detective Robert Perez was allegedly told by his 13-year-old foster daughter Donna that she had been molested. Donna, Robert, and two social workers proceeded to drive through Wenatchee, and Donna allegedly pointed out 22 locations where she had been repeatedly raped and molested along with other children.
Oh my God. And she was unprovoked. She just went up to her stepdad and was like, hey, thing about me is we have to go for a drive. So it's not like the cops or anything like that. This was just, in this case, I'm saying you do believe a kid who just unprovoked and is like, hey, I need to tell you something. That I would immediately be like, okay, let's go for a drive.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to know exactly how this came about because it's just so muddy because like her dad is a detective and he also worked on the case. And then this is also like at the height of Satanic Panic. So I don't want to like discredit, obviously. It's just like
I'll happily discredit. Who do you want me on your behalf to discredit?
it's just like I have a hard time believing anything that Detective Robert Perez had to say.
Okay, yeah, I haven't gotten far enough into the story to find out what a monster he is. So yeah, please continue.
Okay, so somehow they decided it was okay for Detective Perez to work the case that his daughter is involved in. And this case would result in 19 people going to prison, again on no evidence. Some convictions were later overturned or reduced. Several convicted people claimed that their confessions were also coerced. None of the interviews or confessions with Detective Perez were taped either, and he didn't even take notes.
That doesn't seem like, just a procedure-wise, doesn't seem appropriate.
Yeah. So that's the other thing is like it's just hard to even know like what these claims were and how exactly these confessions happened because there's no tapes, no notes.
Well, I think another reason this is, I think, related to all these cases on a broader scale is the idea that particularly in the 80s, we were living through a very conservative time and a very law and order kind of time. And so not only was there a religious right on the rise, but I think everybody really wanted to believe in the infallibility of our justice system. And, you know, it's since long before and since we've been aware as a nation that there are problems with the justice system, but at this particular period in time, I think there was much more of a desire to feel like, hey, if we put something through the courts and the cops show up and they give their testimony, they're telling the truth, you can believe the police. And I think that contributed to a lot of this too, of just the not questioning why I'm sure the defense questioned why none of these confessions were recorded or taped or anything, but culturally we weren't going that deep. We were going, well, the cops, I don't know, they said this guy said it, so
Yeah, exactly. It was so common back then to trust in law enforcement and authority. And I mean, we still see cases like that today. So in this case, initially 43 adults were arrested on nearly 30,000 charges involving 60 children.
I'm sorry, fucking what? That's like the craziest RICO case. I don't even know.
Do you know how many days of nonstop abuse that is?
Do you know how many days of nonstop paperwork that is? Like for the court system to have to introduce every one of the charges, and if you're a jury on that case and you're like, I don't know, get through the first like 8 and let's just be done with it. Like I can't even sit there and read on 30,000 counts of whatever.
I know, like who has the time? That's the other thing that
Washington State.
That just made me think too, like all of this time where an actual crime was happening and somebody was trying to like go in and report it and get movement done. They're like, we don't have time. We're writing up 30,000 of these erroneous claims that never happened, you know?
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe how long it takes to get these kids to confess to being victims of Satanism.
13 of these. That's why we didn't tape them. It was mainly screaming. So that was like, it's not even worth taping these interviews.
And people who criticized the investigation were also in danger. Pastor Robert Robertson was arrested and charged with 11 counts of child sexual abuse, conveniently right after he Publicly criticized the case.
Okay, so now I'm on board with Perez is a fucking it's a pretty good plan. It works 100% of the time. But if you just have like 13 enemies and a daughter, you can absolutely be like, these guys that I owe money to or whatever, let's just send them to prison for this thing that it's the most insane scarlet letter you can have sewn to you just through, and like it follows you even if it's not true that you're a fucking pedophile or whatever.
Yeah.
And so Perez is absolutely like, he didn't want to pay for eggs, and he's like, I think these eggs should be free, you fucking pedophile. Like, I will. And then, just take them. Don't tell anybody.
The Salem witch trials are also very similar. Anytime that somebody would try to like speak out and be like, hey, I don't think that actually happened, they would also get accused.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So,
it's also just Russian society from the 90s for sure, where it's like anyone who was in opposition to the movement in any way was like silenced.
Yeah. So apparently Pastor Robert Robertson, him and his wife were also accused for all these different charges. They were both later acquitted. Donna Perez.
I hope her name was Roberta Robinson. Robinson and Roberta Robinson.
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
The Bobsons?
Yeah.
Ridiculous name. I would change my name immediately.
Yeah, Robert Robertson is crazy.
Yeah.
Donna Perez, the daughter of the detective who had originally apparently made these claims, also would later recant all of her statements and apologize to Pastor Robertson, claiming her father had pressured her to make false statements.
Wow. And when was that? Like 30 years later?
I don't know.
Yeah. All of these things are coming too late.
Yeah, I'm sure it was way too late. 5 of those that were wrongfully convicted did serve full sentences before their cases were overturned.
Wow.
And something that was also really sad in this case is that a lot of these people, a lot of these victims, they were parents and they lost parental rights to their children.
Wow.
And so they had to get legal assistance to get their children back in their custody. And it wasn't until 2000 that the last person in custody was released.
Jeez Louise.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
So the very last case, this is not a daycare case, but I'm also just going to very briefly cover this. This is a huge case. Every podcast ever has talked about it. This is the West Memphis 3. So for people who want to know more, you can go listen to this on so many different shows. But this is like the first thing that came to my mind that made me think of Satanic Panic. May 5th, 1993. 3 8-year-old boys, second graders, would be reported missing in West Memphis, Arkansas. Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers. They had last been seen hanging out together in their neighborhood, and their bodies would later be found naked and hog-tied with their own shoelaces. Their clothing was found in the nearby creek, and 2 pairs of the boys' underwear were missing and never found. Byers had been mutilated in his genitalia, and 2 of the boys had been attacked and drowned, which were Moore and Branch, while Byers appeared to have been killed by a knife attack. And basically what happened after this is 3 teenagers who were, I believe, like 16, 17, and 18. They were Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and JC Miskelly. These teens would quickly be arrested and labeled for the crime. These were basically like latchkey kids that liked rock and roll. They looked different than like your typical conservative, well-behaved kid. And the neighborhood just quickly labeled these teens as being responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And all the teens would continue to maintain their innocence, but police and the media would claim that the boys killed the children as part of a satanic ritual. And to me, this crime is like clearly sexually motivated also. So just the idea that like it's these teenage boys, it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was no physical evidence or motive that could tie any of these teenagers to the scene. Also, one of the kids, Miss Kelly, was intellectually disabled, and he clearly had a coerced confession. He was held for hours, and his confession was not taped.
This not taping right there should be like, you have to throw the case out.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have, in the same way that if someone asked me, did you kill a bunch of kids on the night of June 11th? And I don't have an alibi, and I was like, oh, I was home alone. They're not going to believe my alibi.
Yeah.
You don't have an alibi then because you have no witness, no evidence of you not being there. So it's weird that you're allowed to submit testimony that's not recorded or have any kind of. It should be held at the exact same very low bar
and even
accountability.
Even when you do submit recordings, and I'm no legal expert, so I could be wrong about this, but I don't think you have to submit the entire raw tape. I think a lot of times when confessions get submitted or put on the record, it's oftentimes just like with the pertinent information that doesn't necessarily include the hours leading up to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, I would demand the whole tape if I was representing someone for no other reason than I cut a fucking podcast every week, and I can absolutely manipulate what I want people to sound like or say, or I would want that untouched raw tape of what me see the audio as it was actually recorded.
So
yeah.
I know that the West Memphis 3 had a very complicated release from prison. They did get out. They had to plea what's the term? You probably have it.
The Alford plea. Mm-hmm.
Yes, which means it means what? They're not saying that they're innocent, but they're not guilty either or something.
So they do maintain their innocence with the Alford plea, but they're basically saying that the jury had enough evidence to convict them.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But it sounds like they had none.
Right. Yeah.
So
I guess they took that out because, I mean, they had been in prison for a long
Yeah, we're sorry if we stepped on that. If you notice,
No,
we
it's
need to go
okay.
through that story again.
It's okay.
The Alford plea sounds a lot like a loophole for the state to not get sued.
Exactly. I believe that as well.
It sounds like a thing that's like, well, as long as we can maintain that we did our jobs and you can't come get us for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of the Central Park 5 case, which I haven't covered yet, but that is like such a heartbreaking story, and it's quite similar aside from like the satanic claims. But
if you get arrested and they put a number on the moniker, you definitely didn't do it.
Yeah.
If we were like the podcast threes trials this weekend, it's like those people are getting railroaded.
Yeah.
So did they ever find who did do it in the West Memphis 3?
No, it's still unsolved. There's theories. I'm gonna just vaguely explain this from what I remember reading an article, but there are a lot of people who believe, I don't remember which child, but that it was one of the children's stepfathers.
Oh, yes. Because I watched the documentary trilogy about this. Yeah, because he had a folding knife or something that seemed to maybe have blood on it, or
I don't know that part. I just know like he's apparently really sketchy, and also apparently they found his DNA on the shoelaces that hogtied the kids.
Oh my God.
Oh, maybe.
Open and shut case. This is the guy. That's more evidence than the 3 had.
Yeah, there's also another suspect. They call him Mr. Bojangles because he apparently walked into a Bojangles restaurant like right after the crime happened, and he was like covered in blood.
What? Oh my God, these people seem like such better suspects.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, Mr. Bojangles wasn't wearing a Metallica t-shirt, and that's kind
true.
of, you know.
Also, that blood, Mr. Bojangles could have just been serving that blood-laced Kool-Aid that week as like sort of a promotion. And so it might just be he spilled his blood-laced Kool-Aid all over his shirt.
Could have been. Also, anybody who's like a huge buff on this case, I'm sorry if I'm like just not going into a lot of detail on it. There's so much to talk about here. One thing I do want to highlight is that Miss Kelly, one of the teenagers, the one that was intellectually disabled and made like the coerced confession, the police tried to like have him explain what happened, and there was like everything that he confessed in no way matched any details of the crime scene.
Oh my God, here I was under the moonlight. It was like, this is noon.
Yeah.
Every single thing could be wrong.
I mean, pretty much. Yeah, his confessions are all over the place. And that's what I mean about how I think when they officially submit that stuff, they're able to like leave out parts or
the parts that don't seem like it tracks with what their storyline.
Right. Yeah. So no physical evidence or motive tied them to the crime, but they were all convicted. Baldwin and Miss Kelly were given life sentences, and Eccles, who was labeled the ringleader, was sentenced. No. He was sentenced to death, and he lived out on death row. So he didn't get put to death, but he lived on death row. And it wasn't until years later in 2007 that DNA testing excluded the 3 from the crime.
Wow. Thank God that the death sentence thing, it is a drain on the state in terms of how long we keep people on death row, and it's all bullshit. Like, but luckily that guy was able to stay on death row and not just be murdered until he was exonerated.
Yeah. I mean, that happens a lot. Like most people on death row, they don't end up getting put to death. They just live out their days in prison because it's so expensive to put someone to death.
That's so wild.
Yeah.
Such a stupid system.
The Alford pleas happened in 2011, and the case is also, because of this is so frustrating, considered closed because of those pleas. So the brutal murders of these 3 8-year-old boys still remains unsolved.
So it's not a cold case. It's like we've solved it.
Yeah, whoever did it is fully gotten away with it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's such a brutal, horrific crime. I have a really hard time believing that, like, that's it. They did that and they were done, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was
Awful.
not someone's first rodeo. I mean, also might not be their first literal rodeo. They know how to hog tie, but it's so crazy. That is not the actions of a first-time murderer.
Okay, so the final part of this episode, let's talk about spread and amplification. Like, how did this satanic panic happen? Let's get into some debunking and skepticism. I mean, we've already been doing that,
Sure,
but I'll give y'all a little more, and then the legacy that this panic has left. So obviously, we have to talk about media coverage and sensationalism, how all of these talk shows were blowing this up and bringing on these quote unquote expert witnesses that were nothing more than charlatans and were just scaring people. Also, something you guys talked about on your show was all of the training seminars for law enforcement that were going around, and all these mental health professionals with completely false information.
Yep.
One of the ones that I watched was like they had this teen girl like laying down pretending to be dead, and she was wearing a bikini.
Hey, a job is a job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your new actor. You know what I mean? Just looking to snatch up some credits.
Yeah. It was super weird. It was basically this, I don't remember the guy's name, but it was this law enforcement officer, and they had drawn a pentagram on the teenager's stomach, and he was like trying to explain how you look for signs of a satanic ritual. And he was like, if you see this on the stomach and you see this mark, like the satanic people typically cut from the ear to the throat, and it means this, like just all these crazy things that I'm like, what are you talking about? But they were like distributing this.
Did you find this video on YouTube?
I believe so. Yeah.
I know there's some. I've watched a few of them, but I always love when there's more, because they're all so crazy. And it's so, again, it's the kind of thing that is very silly in hindsight. You look at it and go, people fell for this, and not only did they fall for it, they almost wanted to fall for it. They were like excited that somebody was like, I think for some cops it was like your town, you may not have drug dealers and you may not have serial killers, but you might have Satanists. And then all of a sudden their jobs get that much more important and exciting.
So get your ass down to the local pool, because when these kids are in bikinis, it's when you can best see all of the imagery that they put all over their bodies. I mean, it's shooting fish in a barrel. Get down there and just grab people with the pentagrams and take them to the station.
There were doctors in all of those daycare cases as well that had no experience in looking for signs of sexual abuse, because again, child sexual abuse was just very recently starting to get recognized. So they were saying they were giving this expert medical testimony. There were a couple cases where they would talk about like, this child was clearly abused because if you look at sorry, I'm going to get a little graphic here. If you look at the child's hymen, it looks like it's been torn here, when it was literally just normal anatomy.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Well, again, as we've established in this episode, this is just a person with a lab coat. Like, there's no credentials, probably. They weren't even real doctors, I bet. Their first name was Doctor. It was very confusing.
Doctor.
Yeah.
It was Detective Perez in a lab coat and those
it's always Detective Perez in every one of these.
Yeah.
It's just him and Larry and Michelle Smith. Like, it's the same three people over and over, just in different outfits.
Oh my God.
The doctors in many of these cases would also later publicly apologize, saying that after decades of new gained experience, they know that they were mistaken in these cases.
Cool.
Yeah, a lot of this well after the fact, my bad.
Yeah, too little, too late.
If your testimony or expert analysis was, a major player in someone being convicted, I think if that person's conviction is overturned, you should have to fucking go to prison. Or like there should be some penalty for the fact that you don't get to just 20 years later be like, you know what? Turns out I didn't even know what a hymen was. You know what I mean? Like if you do that and someone spent 8 years behind bars, you should have some accountability for your part in that.
Yeah.
I thought they were saying hyphen. That's why I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think for like the adults in these cases, for sure, like there should have been some type of
I'm not saying the kids.
Yeah,
I'm talking about expert witnesses and
Yeah. So there was also this survey that came out in 1994. So like right around when all of this was coming to an end. This was from Red Book magazine, and they surveyed all of these Americans. In the survey, they said 70% still believed that satanic ritual abuse was real. And again, this is after all of these trials, and
that's
it's just like,
that's not surprising. I mean, if you asked me tomorrow after this episode, if you asked me, I'd be like, yeah, I'm sure it's happening. I just don't think it's happening to these people. Like, I'd still fine with the idea of like a conspiracy, but I don't. I what I'm getting at is, I guess I'm not surprised that the average person was like, we just haven't caught him yet. you know?
Yeah.
That same year, the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect, under the Department of Health and Human Services, released a report claiming there was no evidence of truth in satanic ritual abuse claims. And there were also later a lot of critical examinations of recovered memory techniques, those techniques that they used in Michelle Remembers and in so many of these cases.
That Chris one time coined an amazing phrase that I've since forgotten.
Yeah,
specifically about
this.
this.
So in 1999, the American Psychiatric Association would release this article, all this research they had done on recovered memory therapy. And I have a quote. So they say, research has shown that memory does not always record events accurately. In the presence of severe or prolonged stress, people may suffer significant impairment of the retention, recall, and accuracy of memories. Memories can also be altered as a result of suggestions, particularly by a trusted person or authority figure. No specific unique symptom profile has been identified that necessarily correlates with abuse experiences. It's well documented that both dismissing true accounts and accepting false accounts can significantly harm patients and possibly others. End quote.
True.
Basically be like, stop doing this shit.
Yeah, I feel like that really well explains all of this. More recently, in 2014, I found a really good Slate.com article. This is in the show notes. It's by Linda Rodriguez McRobbie, and she said in this article, quote, "As with previous panics, the dangers may have been imaginary, but the consequences were not. The real toll of the satanic ritual abuse panic was on the children dragged into it and accused people like the Kellers, who numbered in the hundreds by the end of the decade." End quote. And one of the craziest things that I found was from the American Bar Association Center on Children and the Law. They did this study in 1993, studying like all these different prosecution cases that had been done throughout the US. And they found that 26% of prosecutors had handled at least one case involving allegations of ritualistic abuse.
26% of prosecutors nationwide?
Nationwide.
Woo!
So basically, 1 in 4 prosecutors in all of the US had done at least one of these satanic panic cases.
Jesus.
And here's the thing, right? So this massive, 1/4 of these people are dealing with it. Was it 3,000, 30,000 charges and counts and blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
for a decade and a half. All these experts and witnesses. And then pretty much everyone says it was bullshit. And all these people just went into the wind.
Yeah.
All these people who were experts in the field and were this.
Well, a lot of the prosecutors built their careers on some of these convictions. They were big, high profile. They got to go on the news. They got to go on the talk shows. And some of those prosecutors, I'm sure, are still prosecuting.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a disco band and then disco went away, you don't find success after that. But so the fact that, your bread and butter was satanic panic stuff, it's weird that they got to continue being, revered in their fields.
Yeah.
Well, prosecutors don't have to pick one kind of case to prosecute their whole life.
Well, maybe they should. Then they get good at it. You ever think about that?
I feel like this is why we have people like Dr. Oz. Like,
That's how we end up with Dr. Oz.
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, naturally, with all of this, luckily came improvement in child interviewing techniques and evaluation of evidence. Methods used during the Satanic Panic were taken straight from the ritual abuse panic playbook. The interviewing techniques were highly suggestive. They would do things like bring out these rag doll that had genitalia, and they would say things to the kids like, "Show me what so-and-so did to you at daycare," implying that something had happened.
Show me on the bear where they touched you.
Yeah.
Which is like a real saying from like court cases or whatever. They bring in like a stuffed animal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They would also say things like, "I think you forgot to tell us about some things that happened."
Yeah.
Wow. Which is interesting because if you are working in law and I approached a witness, they could say, objection leading the witness. Like you're not allowed to put into the witness's mouth, what you want to hear them say, yet they don't hold that same standard for the police end of it, I guess.
Yeah. So going back to that Slate.com article, McRobbie says, quote, "Though satanic ritual abuse cases are virtually unheard of now, the panic has not entirely subsided. A number of groups still very much believe in satanic and other ritual abuse. Even if most of us don't believe Satan is lurking in daycare centers, we are not immune to the panic that people felt. One of the hallmarks of a panic is that you don't realize it's a panic when you're in the middle of it." End quote. So I thought it would be good to end this episode by briefly talking about some modern day examples of satanic panic.
Yeah, QAnon.
Yep, that's my first one.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, never heard of it.
That's what it mutated into. I think that's part of why you still find people who don't fully understand the satanic panic, because we sort of have a new one, and the old ones have kind of been forgotten to time for the mainstream. And
well, I guess, is there a difference in the sense that QAnon, I mean, they're not putting up the numbers of wrongfully convicted people, and it's not maybe creating the damage that,
well, it's not,
or it is, and I just don't know.
It's not creating the person-to-person damage, but I think it's creating a similar cultural rot.
Yeah.
Well, I think that cultural rot the internet has a lot to do with it, which I find, and all I'm saying is it's not putting up the numbers. It's not the stats on the back of the trading card between Satanic Panic and QAnon. Satanic Panic did it with a lot less and caused a lot more damage, where QAnon, it's like, I don't know, I feel like the internet's doing the heavy lifting, and luckily, at least for now, it hasn't led to a shit ton. There's Pizzagate and stuff, but it hasn't led to people being like, I've been in prison for 13 years and stuff.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying and drawing the comparisons.
Yeah, QAnon and Pizzagate are the two that I'm just going to briefly talk about. And like what y'all were saying, QAnon is like the modern day satanic panic. When I was talking to my friends about that I was going to cover this topic, I was talking to them last night, and I was like explaining what satanic panic was because they didn't know. And they were like, isn't that just QAnon? So like, that's how we see it, now. And I mean, I remember when I was on Facebook years ago, and I can't remember what the post was, but it was like some celebrity post of like, it was like, I don't know, like Ashton Kutcher eating a baby, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what is this? And I found what I didn't know at the time was a QAnon Facebook page.
Yeah. Well, Ashton knows about that. You get the 6-hour window at the fire station. So he's probably went and picked up a kid. Somebody saw him do it, and then to just put two and two together.
QAnon also has tunnels too. They call them deep underground military bases, or DUMBs, which is where they say that the kids that are being drained of their adrenochrome are getting shuffled off to, are these DUMBs. Is
that real?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. It's so real.
Oh, I meant like, you heard that for real, not like, is it real that it's happening? I just meant like you weren't making up a fake example.
Yes to both.
Okay, gotcha. Sure.
So for anybody who doesn't know, QAnon is a far-right conspiracy theory-based movement that gained a lot of popularity during COVID. In May of 2021, NPR released an article titled "America's Satanic Panic Returns, this time through QAnon."
You know what's crazy is you mentioned some of these people from Satanic Panic were just getting out of fucking prison in like 2017 or whatever.
Yeah.
So you must have done a life in prison for something you didn't do that's recognized as bullshit. And then within like 2 years, you must be like watching the news going, oh no.
Yeah.
You
How
get
did
out,
this happen again?
You get out, and now the president believes it.
Yeah,
like, what
that's
happened?
true. It's pretty wild. It's
Literally.
pretty wild.
So people who buy into this movement claim that there are celebrities, most often Democrats, that are kidnapping, torturing, and cannibalizing children using their blood in satanic rituals. There's also the belief that they are specifically draining the children of a chemical compound called adrenochrome.
Oh, and so there it is. You were right, Chris.
Chris, I didn't read into this. Can you explain what adrenochrome is?
So I don't know too much about the
You would never make it in the 80s, man. You have to just commit to being an expert.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Confidently
okay, here we go. let me put on let me put on my lab coat and put my hand on a Bible and tell you everything I'm about to say is 100% accurate. So adrenochrome is a real chemical that is produced in the human body as a byproduct of when we feel the emotion fear. And there, at some point, somewhere in the past, according to my, again, 100% accurate knowledge of this, there were studies around adrenochrome, or maybe not even studies, but it was used as some sort of, there was evidence that it could be a hallucinogen, some sort of, super serum that you could take for all these rejuvenating kind of properties that it has. And that has tied into the idea that children produce adrenochrome in great quantities when they are afraid. And so that became this conspiracy that there's these groups of politicians and influential people and billionaires who they scare children and then drain them of their adrenochrome, and then they drink it so that they can be immortal or they can have power or what have you.
So Monsters Inc. is a documentary.
Correct. Yes. Monsters Inc. is a documentary. And with that, I step off the stand.
Yeah. Ed, was this a Rick and Morty episode? Because this sounds like a Rick and Morty episode.
Not during my season, but no, we didn't touch on it.
So the movement seems to have started in 2017 on 4chan after an anonymous user named Q Clearance Patriot.
They're all anonymous users, is 4chan.
I guess this person writing the article didn't know that, but fair. So they posted on this message board, and 3 other users promoted and spread their early posts, and the panic began. Lawrence Wright, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author who wrote a book about satanic panic, would compare the movement to QAnon, saying, quote, "They see themselves as heroic. And how can you be heroic in today's world? Well, you protect the children. You protect the children against this cannibal that is out to turn them into sex slaves. How could there be anything more important than that?" End quote.
I mean, a cannibal, at that point, protect them from a sex trafficker. A cannibal's goal is to eat things.
Well, it's all
why the fuck would he
one.
give the kid away?
There's sex trafficking cannibals. There's a famous video that everyone claims to have seen that no one's ever actually seen, called Frazzle Drip, that is supposedly a video of Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin eating a baby, and then Hillary Clinton wears the baby's face on her face.
Oh my God.
The baby's face is too small.
It is, first of all, way too small. That's barely going to cover your nose. I just had a baby. I know how small a baby's face is, and it ain't going on my face. So, yeah, Frazzle Drip is likely not real, but a lot of influencers
likely
on the right wing QAnon side have said that they've seen it, or that they've seen clips of it or whatever, which is crazy because they clearly are just lying, because they haven't.
Yeah, they clearly haven't.
But there was something I was going to say.
It's a Kiru disease.
Well, yeah,
you're gonna bring that up.
We did an episode on cannibalism, and Kuru disease is also the disease that Hillary Clinton supposedly has from eating
all these
people,
babies,
from cannibalizing people, and eating all these babies. But
okay,
I have one good story about this. My wife is from the Deep South, and
recovering cannibal. A
relative of hers, somewhat not direct immediate relative, but a relative of hers, he works in the Forestry Service, and he told her dad the first time I met my wife's parents, we were driving around, and her dad was telling this story from the front seat, and I was in the back seat of the car. He said that he'd been told by this guy who works in the Forestry Service that he'd been on an island off the coast, and he had seen Hillary Clinton killing and eating babies on the island. And I said, geez, I hope he can take us there, because I'd sure like to stop her from doing it again. And I thought I was being very funny, and it was not met with laughter. So there are people who are open to this idea that this is happening, and for some reason love to say that they've seen it happen.
Wow.
I also love that it's almost exclusively politicians, and not like the billionaire class doesn't play in as much as you'd think. The people with the means to acquire, dispose of, and cover up, They no longer seem to be the ones in these stories. It's always public figures who are constantly being watched by paparazzi all day and don't have a minute alone. They're the
Well,
ones
and
perpetrating.
another part of QAnon is that there was a secret. This was an earlier iteration of QAnon, but early on,
When they
the
ask you to read the first draft.
well, the very first post said that Hillary Clinton's arrest was coming in a matter of days. This was right after Trump had been elected the first time. And obviously there was no big announcement of her arrest, but Q kept posting that these politicians were going to be arrested, they were going to be paraded in front of the American public, they were going to be renditioned off to Guantanamo Bay. And so when that didn't happen, then the conspiracy changed, and then it turned out that all these politicians had actually been cloned, and their clones were serving time in Guantanamo Bay.
Holy
Oh my
shit!
God.
The clones had been arrested.
These are their
leading
innies, if you're Severance fans.
Yeah. But that's what happens with the conspiracy theory. The less evidence there is, the weirder it gets to keep the story the same, even though nothing seems to be changing.
Wow.
Did you see Infinity Pool?
I didn't see Infinity.
I liked Infinity Pool, but there's a little bit of that in that. So check it out.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. One of the big key differences between QAnon and Satanic Panic is that, as far as I know, no children have come forward to say that they are victims of QAnon.
I don't think so.
It's a fully adult-led panic that this is happening.
Oh,
but
that's
there's
interesting.
There's no kid component.
Yeah.
Wow.
I do remember during COVID, there were a lot of videos that I'm assuming were QAnon that were going around where it was like, protect the children. And they were trying to get the kids to not wear masks because then they were like harder to be identified and like they were easier to be trafficked. Because if you like abducted this child at the grocery store and they were wearing a mask, then you wouldn't be able to easily identify and like find the kid, basically. And they were saying like it was like this anti-mask agenda that was going around, and it was like linked to QAnon.
Well,
That's
to
so
Ed's
wild.
point, I think that's the influence of the internet. Like the
Yeah.
internet is this hive mind where you can no longer have a limited conspiracy theory. Now your conspiracy theory needs to be a theory of everything. Whereas in like the 80s, I feel like I could see someone in the 80s, if there had been a pandemic, being like, oh, if your kid wears a mask, they're easier to abduct because you can't see their face. But it wouldn't have necessarily been wrapped into everything else. That would have been its own panic. That would have been its own thing. And QAnon is now like, oh, you've got this crazy idea and this crazy idea, and they're all part of the same. And it's because all the people who believe this shit are sitting on the same Facebook groups,
Yeah.
not the Scared All the Time Facebook group, which is a great group that you should join.
Great group of people that would never.
Many of the other Facebook groups have crazy people in them, and they just sit there and tell each other these stories all day, and it naturally mutates in a way that's also very hard to trace.
Yeah, and
'Cause
people
no
are
one's-
good at people are good at the internet too now, in algorithms and what have you. So especially if you want to, for bad actor reasons, spread this stuff, oh, if we tie it into protect the children, we can move the mask stuff around.
Yeah.
If we tie it into this hashtag, which anyone in their right mind wouldn't agree with protecting children, so it will move and it will get
Yeah.
reposted and what have you, but it's moving this totally other agenda. I guess the only saving grace at the moment is that we're not seeing the numbers of a satanic panic of people's lives ruined yet, but
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. So, okay. So the other one, the last one that I'll talk about is Pizzagate, which my understanding is this is a QAnon thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a conspiracy theory that came out in 2016 claiming that there is a pedophile ring operating out of a Washington pizza restaurant called Comet Ping Pong.
Washington D.C.
Yes, sorry, DC. It's called Comet Ping Pong, and it's run by people in the highest levels of the Democratic Party. Like this, allegedly, this pedophile ring is run by these Democrats. So this story went viral on Twitter with nearly 1 million tweets being sent out using the hashtag Pizzagate. One man even traveled hundreds of miles to the restaurant, this is scary, with a gun and opened fire, claiming that he was doing a self-investigation into the claims.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In early November, WikiLeaks released emails from Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta. Prankster sites and paranoid people online found one of the contacts in Podesta's emails was James Elefantis, who is the owner of Comet Ping Pong Restaurant. Elefantis is a Democrat. He supports the party, and he has raised money for Obama and Clinton. He was also once in a relationship with an influential liberal operative, and this is all that it took for somebody to create this crazy conspiracy fiction narrative that he is running this restaurant that has a pedophile ring in it that is run by these Democratic Party members. Elefantis has had protesters show up to his place of business. He would later tell the media they ignore basic truths. The conspiracy theory would say that the pedophile ring, for example, was run out of the restaurant's basement when they didn't even have a basement. Elefantis, along with several other employees, received very threatening messages, and they had to lock their social media accounts. So, in my opinion, I think it's fair to say it's not a matter of if, but when, for when we see our next moral panic. And that's scary.
I think it's coming. What was it? 2 days before Hillary's getting arrested? I think I'm going to go further than 2 days, but I think AI is going to be the next, like the next something that happens will have started with AI. With convincing enough AI, it'll either be, something as big as World War III, or it'll be we burned this pizza place to the ground because there's a video, an augmented reality video that was shot out front that looks like something else happened. And it's just convincing enough, and it makes the rounds fast enough before anybody can say, hey, that's not real. That I think is going to be the next, AI is just going to make QAnon, like that type of shit, so much more convincing, because you already have
deep fakes.
Yeah, I don't want to be rude here. You already old people. You already have old people being like, look at this fucking thing. Jesus Christ, it shrimps for arms. This is crazy. And that's just an AI thing. But it's the fact that people are so quick to believe the shitty version of AI means that, AI is going to do us in. It's not going to take our jobs. It'll burn this place to the ground way before it takes our jobs from like a misunderstanding.
I find it interesting that there hasn't been more of a pushback against AI from the religious right. I keep waiting for, and I think it probably speaks to just where the culture is right now and where everyone's alliances are. But I keep waiting for some influential right-wing religious figure to be ranting against the demons that we're creating on the computer, because it's really not too far from the, I mean, we're creating intelligences that trick us, even if they're not doing it on purpose per se. They hallucinate, they lie. Like it's a technology that's really not, as far as technologies go, it's not too far of a stretch to label it demonic. I mean, I think some of the inventors or people around the inventors of AI have warned that they think of them potentially as kind of like demons that we don't fully understand. And I don't know if it's just because it's moving so quickly that people kind of in those, like Ed said, brackets of older people, like don't really understand it. And so they don't quite get how dangerous it is, or that they're just being inundated with so much of it that it seems normal. Because I don't know about you guys, but I have from in-laws and relatives and stuff, I get messages on Instagram or Facebook of like, thought you'd love this video. Look how big, because I love frogs, right? So it'll be like a frog the size of a VW bug hopping down the street somewhere.
Oh my God, the Loveland Frogman.
And they'll be like, yeah, I thought you'd love this. And I'm like, you don't think this is real, do you? You don't think there's a big frog that you've never heard of, do you? Like, this is crazy.
I just saw someone recently talking about this, and it kind of blew my mind, where they were talking about, like, the more we stay inside, the more we stay insular, there's going to be like kids potentially in 20 years who see a giant frog and was like, well, I've never not seen a giant frog, and I've seen convincing video of a giant frog. It's like if you showed a kid a rhinoceros right now who doesn't know about a rhinoceros and you told that this crazy giant thing with a horn, like I just tell them it was made by AI, they can then start believing that it doesn't exist because it was like, oh yeah, a computer made that. There's no such thing as like I nowhere in my hometown have I seen a rhinoceros. And
So you're
so
saying,
there's so many
wait,
wild things like that.
you're saying one of the dangers of AI is that if a generation is raised to not believe anything crazy that they see on the internet, they might think that natural things are not real.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. I mean, you summed it up in a way that maybe I wasn't exactly going, but that's even better than what I was going to say.
I guess that's a possibility. I mean, it's going to be very confusing for like my son to navigate the world that he's about to enter into. I mean, to bring it back to the world of the things that Kadra you talk about on this show, when it comes to UFOs and monsters and strange stuff like that, I pretty much at this point, if somebody presents a video on a UFO subreddit or something, especially if it's an older video and they're like, "Oh, I'd never seen this before. Look, this was shot in 1977," and it's good, I pretty much at this point automatically say, "Nah, nope." Like I would have been aware of something of this quality existing for the past 40 years. There's no way someone's just finding this now
Yeah.
and it's real. I've kind of bracketed off anything, at least anything that's claiming to be old. There's modern video that I'm sure is going to start being faked soon. But at this point, it does seem like the 6-second rule. If it's really convincing UFO monster footage and it's only 6 seconds long, that's pretty much about as long as AI can generate. So you can file that away immediately as that's just AI.
Okay.
So
That's good for everybody listening to know.
All right,
Yeah,
so
it's-
always ask for a lawyer. Don't watch anything longer than 6 seconds.
no, only watch things longer than 6 seconds.
Oh wait, I'm sorry. Only watch things.
If Kadra posts a clip from this show and it's only 6 seconds long, it didn't happen.
Shit. Put us in the
Damn it.
category of rhinoceros. 'Cause rhinoceros. What is the plural of rhinoceros? Just rhinoceros.
Rhinoceri.
Rhinoceri. This shit went off
Okay.
the rails.
So I feel like a good way to just summarize this and to remind our listeners is like the next time that you hear something that sounds crazy, like listen to your gut. And there's a reason that we have the internet now. Like it's always wise to take a second and look things up and don't just like immediately go into believing. And like we've all done that before. We've all fallen for something that we've read or saw on the internet. People my age have sent me videos before that I'll like watch it and it's like clearly AI generated, but like it happens to everybody. So just remember, like the media is here to create polarization and fear, and they're not designed to deliver facts. That is something that I want to do an episode on, is like the history of the media and how many times they have gotten things wrong. So just remember that the next time you hear something that doesn't sound right, look it up.
But not all news is fake news, though.
No.
Because that's how you create an
I would
authoritarian
also
government.
say an uncomfortable truth that we have to face is that, especially if you hear something that you agree with, look it up. Because a lot of what gets into each of our individual information bubbles are from sources that are calibrated either through fact or fiction to be things that we've clicked on before. So a lot of what you see, you will agree with. But if it's something that sounds too good to be true, even for something that you agree with, like I would say, one example on the right is a lot of people overnight came to believe that Elon Musk is going to send us all $5,000 checks with the money that he's saving through Doge.
Yeah,
Now,
I don't understand. I
obviously-
keep hearing that too, and I've never heard it on any of the news sources I don't watch the news, but
that's why I bring it up as an example, because to us, yes, that is very silly. But I do think that's something, if you put yourself in the shoes of somebody who loves this administration and thinks that they're doing the right thing, that's very easy to go, well, see, I told you. That's great. I love that. You should spend 5 seconds to look it up. And I'm sure there's a good example on the left that I just can't think of off the top of my head, because all day we're inundated with this stuff. But it's very easy to be pulled further into your own information bubble especially if you believe everything that sounds good to you. So just generally check. check a couple of mainstream news sources. I know, for me, what I do, and some people would tell you I'm an idiot for believing the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, but generally, there are media institutions that have fact checkers for a reason. Yes, they do get things wrong, but if you hear something and it's not being reported by any of the mainstream cable networks and any of the mainstream newspapers, there's probably a reason for it. Sometimes it may be because it's something uncomfortable that we don't want to talk about. I know there's a lot in like the Israel-Palestine conflict that has kind of not been discussed because it's a very uncomfortable, difficult conversation. But generally, there will be well-vetted information out there. It does exist. It's harder to find if you're not looking for it. Yeah, I don't know. Question everything. I don't know.
Yeah,
No, it's good advice. I love it.
Always have a lawyer. Don't watch anything more than 6 seconds or under 6 seconds. I forgot. Don't. If anything's too good to be true, don't believe it. Like billionaires having your best interest in fucking mind.
Well,
and more importantly, listen to this podcast. Listen to Perplexity. Listen to Scared All the Time.
Yes.
Only listen to us.
Yes. I was going to say, I would love at this point to let you guys talk about your show for a second for people who aren't familiar.
Wow. Now that everything we've said have made them turn off your show, then we get the opportunity when no one's here anymore.
Sorry, Ed. That's my fault. Scared All the Time is a show about the things that scare us, which, as you might have gathered from listening to this show, is pretty much everything. It's a scary world, and we try to keep things light. We've heard from people, even though it was not our intent, that it has helped them deal with their anxieties and fears by hearing us present as generally well-researched, as well as I could research things, fact-based information about fears ranging from alien abductions to elevator accidents to we had an episode drop the day that we're recording this on chimpanzee attacks. So some are funnier than others, some are scarier than others, and we think if we're doing our job right, there will be at least one episode that every fan will never listen to because it hits them a little too close to home for something that they're scared of. So check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. Support us on patreon.com/scaredallthetime. We have I think we have really good rewards. Ed does all of our merch by hand. So if you order a shirt or a button or a sticker, that man is making it himself. And
it's true.
Yeah, we just generally like to have a good time and promote good vibes. So
yeah, and so we were very happy when you asked us to come on because this is a good vibes program here.
Yeah, no, y'all do a great job. I am like very impressed by your show. I love the research. I love the dynamic with you guys. And like you said, you keep it light, but it's also well researched, and you're talking about very important and real things and scary things. Not always real things, maybe, but you know, and it's I think a good collab because y'all talk about things every week that scare you, and I talk about things every week that perplex me. So
well, we have to have you on our show next. We have to think up some fears that can make for an hour and a half.
I would love that. Yeah, that would be great. So that, everybody, is our episode on Satanic Panic. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have not done so yet, please leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. Each time you do that, it boosts me up the charts. That's how I get new listeners. So thank you in advance for that. If you're watching on YouTube, I would love if you drop a comment down below with your thoughts on this episode. Like this video and subscribe if you haven't. And if you want to share the podcast with a couple people, that also is much appreciated. And if you really want to support the show for as little as $2 a month starting in April, because I'm doing some price changes, you can go check out patreon.com/perplexity mystery podcast. I've got a lot of bonus content on there, and you always get early and ad-free episodes at the lowest tier.
Come on, as little as 2 bones, people.
2 bones. Yes. So Chris, Ed, thank you again. It was so great to have you guys on.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
It was a lot of fun.
I had a good time.
And as always, you all are amazing. I hope you have a great week. Please stay safe, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.
I don't know if we're supposed to audibly say
You
bye.
can say bye.
Okay.
Bye.